This is Uncommonly Remarkable. We have surprisingly casual discussions about the lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. Think of this podcast as an opportunity to learn something new and to pick up on an entrepreneurial tip or two through open conversation. I'm Artis Beatty. I'm a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and conversations held here are separate from my work with My Eye Doctor. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is Terry Tucker, a former Division I basketball player, undercover narcotics officer, SWAT hostage negotiator, and a 13-year cancer warrior. Through unimaginable pain, loss, and transformation, Terry has become a living example of what it means to lead with purpose and resilience. In this episode, we talk about how to control your mind before it controls you, how pain can be fuel for growth, and why your purpose matters more than your job title. Terry also shares his 4 truths, a simple but powerful framework that has carried him through the darkest moments of his life. Whether you're facing a challenge right now or just looking for inspiration to live more intentionally, this conversation will give you the mindset and motivation to keep going. Let's dive in. Ladies, gentlemen, all you remarkable people, please welcome Terry to the show. Terry, welcome to the show. I am so very excited to have you on. I appreciate you spending part of your day with me. I think we're going to have an amazing conversation. I have so many questions, and hopefully I'm going to ask the right ones so that the audience can actually get some of this, because you're an absolutely amazing individual with a lot to share with the world, and I'm happy you're going to do it here with me.
Well, Artis, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today.
You know, we were talking a little bit earlier about springtime, and it's springtime. It's beautiful. You're in a different part of the country, and so you're prepping for a little snow before it all warms up finally. And so it's just amazing to me how we're in the same country and we're so varied in the way things work.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my wife and I are both from the Midwest. I'm from Chicago and she's from Minnesota, and we're in Denver now. And, you know, in the Midwest, when winter comes, it's cold, it's dark, and it's gloomy. Here in Denver, you know, you can get 25 inches of snow today, and tomorrow it'll be sunny and 50 degrees, and half of it will go away. So we really enjoy the seasons, but we just don't enjoy the Midwest winters that we grew up with.
That's amazing. Anybody that knows me and has actually heard me talk about it, I'm a Southerner at heart. I grew up in the South. Winter is one of those things that we have to deal with, but we don't like. And so I can't imagine that we get into April when we should have flowers in springtime and there be any snow. So God bless. But so it's always hard for me when I have someone who has so many amazing things to talk about to find a starting point. But you kind of gave me one. You're from the Midwest. You grew up in Chicago. And growing up in Chicago, you know, what you're doing now with being able to help people understand purpose and empowering them to think differently about what they want to do is not exactly how everything began for you. And so you started off, though, playing some basketball, because if people are watching this is always the great equalizer. You can't tell that you're 6'8" while you're sitting there.
Yeah, just from here up, right? Yeah, I am. I'm 6'8", and it's funny because I have a brother that's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame. Another brother who was 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So we used to joke that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, you know, there wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on in the front of the church. But our 5'8" mother, you know, was really the boss. It didn't matter how big, tall, strong we were. Whatever mom said, that's the way it went. So
that's amazing. That's amazing. So you played basketball. Were you playing basketball growing up, and then started? And you actually played Division I in college, right?
I did. I was, fortunately or unfortunately, I was 6'5" when I was 13 years old. And I had a size 14 shoe, and I had these ears that looked like Dumbo. You know, my head had not sort of caught up with my ears. And so I got teased mercilessly because of my outward appearance. And the great thing about basketball, other than a lot of other sports, is it's a sport you can play by yourself. So as long as I had a hoop and I had a ball, I could go play. And the more I played, the better I got. And the better I got, the more I wanted to play. So basketball was kind of an outgrowth of the fact that, one, I was 6'5", and two, I got teased and bullied when I was in grade school. And I put my effort into being a better basketball player. And eventually that got me to the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, where I played for 4 years.
And did you have ambition that that was going to be what you did? Is that you were going to be a basketball player? Did you think about going into the NBA? Like how did you think about basketball as you were going through things?
I really looked at basketball as I was a basketball player. And what I mean by that, I wasn't somebody who just played basketball. I really was a player. I was a student of the game. I understood the game. I understand, if you had an odd defense, you're going to have an even offense in terms of like that. And so basketball was something I absolutely wanted to do professionally. But I had 3 knee surgeries in high school, and the first 2 were pre-arthroscopic. So I have the sort of zipper scar on the outside of my knee. And just the fact that I was able to get a scholarship to play Division I basketball after 3 knee surgeries, I can't tell you how grateful I was for that, because I never expected that given my knee problems. And so I knew that pretty much college was as far as I was going to go, that there was no way I would be able to do 82 NBA games, and then if we made the playoffs and things like that. 30 games was a tough season for me, so 82 was something I couldn't even fathom.
Well, I asked that because as I've listened to things that you've talked about, I've read things that you've written. There's this concept of purpose, and that there may not be a singular purpose, but there may be a time period purpose. And when I think about your basketball career and then some of the things that you have done subsequently, it feels like in the moment that was what you were meant to be doing, and so you didn't half-heart it. You did it, there had to be then some things that you learned along the way that better informed where you were going to be or what you were going to do next.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of that was an outgrowth of those knee surgeries. Because I remember when I went back playing basketball after having those knee surgeries, my brain was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my mind. Things like, hey, you're probably a step slower since your surgeries, and coaches aren't going to be interested in recruiting you. And artists, I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still reaching out about the possibility of playing for their college or university. I learned early, probably 15 years old, of the importance of controlling your mind, of the thoughts that go through our mind, how we look at that. I always used to think that, thoughts in and of themselves are arbitrary. They're neutral. They come in, they go. The Cleveland Clinic estimates that we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts that pass through our mind every day, most of which we don't even pay attention to. We have about 3,500 new thoughts every day, and our brain operates at a speed of about 1,000 miles an hour. So given all that, your brain can still only, or your mind can still only hold one thought at a time. Why would you want to make that a negative thought? And I think the problem with most of us, and I've been guilty of this absolutely in my life, is that so many of us think with our fears and our insecurities instead of using our minds. And I know I've done that. I know I wanted to get involved in a project or a business or something. You kind of pull back, you're like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not smart enough, or maybe I don't have enough information, or what will people say about me if I fail? That's thinking with our fears and our insecurities. That's not thinking with our minds. And whenever I have an opportunity to speak to, especially young people, I always tell them, if there's something in your heart, something in your soul that you believe you're supposed to do, but it scares you, go ahead and do it. Because at the end of your life, the things you're going to regret are not going to be those things you did. They're going to be those things you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to go back and do them.
Well, and I think that's fantastic advice. And I think it's something that people don't always hear, particularly young people, because I think there's always that fear that says, if I fail, what's going to happen to me, and we always jump to the worst possible thing that can happen. Although most of those things are inflated, right? And there is always opportunity to look at that as a learning experience in lieu of a failure, which I think holds a lot of people back from being super successful.
I agree. I love the quote from Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, who said, "I never lose. I either win or I learn." So if
Yeah,
you take the negativity, you take the adversity that you experience in life, and you learn from it, what a great tool. And then you
right.
take that and you put it into application or practice with the next thing you get involved in, whether you're starting a business, whether it's, you're learning algebra, whatever it ends up being, you learn from your mistakes. And I think where people become, and I'm going to use this word, losers, is when they don't learn from their mistakes and they try to blame other people for the problems that they have in their life.
I couldn't agree more. And so you were playing basketball, you were in college, you understood that, hey, this is maybe not going to be my profession, but I got to have one. What happened? What did you choose, or how did you get there?
Yeah, so if you look at my resume, it kind of looks like a Super Bowl went off in a room. I mean, it's just kind of banging all over the place. But there's a backstory, and the backstory is this: my paternal grandfather, my dad's dad, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954, and in 1933 he was shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury; he was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories growing up that his mom, my grandmother, told of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. And artists, let's be honest, I mean, trauma medicine in 1933 was a whole lot different than
Not
trauma
the same.
medicine is in 2025. And so when I expressed an interest in sort of following in my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to lead. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to lead. And so when I graduated from the Citadel, I kind of had a choice. I moved home to find a job because, as I said, I'm old and the internet wasn't even available to help people find employment. But I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. So knowing my dad was dying, I had kind of my first big adult choice. It was like, well, yeah, Dad, I know you're dying. Sorry about that. I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm going to go blaze my own trail. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So understanding that backstory, my first two jobs were in business. My first job was in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their
Yeah.
marketing department. And then I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. I thought they did such a great job that I wanted to be part of that. And it wasn't until I was 37 years old, which is pretty old to be getting into law enforcement, that I went through the Cincinnati, Ohio Police Academy and became a full-time police officer. And artist, I'll tell you, one of the biggest things that I am proud of in my life is that I never let my dream, I never let my purpose die. I could have said, hey, you know what? I'm a hospital administrator making good money. I can just stay with that. But I certainly, with the support of my family, I gave that up to do what I felt my purpose was to do in life, and that was to get into law enforcement.
That's amazing to me. And then if you think about the path, that's also kind of amazing, right? So you go from marketing at Wendy's, which is by. Did you ever meet was Dave Thomas? Is that
Oh
his name?
yeah, several times. Yeah.
Oh wow. So you go from marketing at Wendy's to hospital administration, and then into law enforcement, and you ended up as a SWAT negotiator, right?
I did. I really was kind of, I'm going to drink from the cup of law enforcement. I mean, I'm going to do everything I can. I mean, I started out certainly in a marked car in a uniform running a beat. And you're going to laugh at this, I was an undercover narcotics investigator. Here I am, 6'8". It's not like I blend in or anything like that.
What?
Yes, I bought drugs. I did all that stuff. And artists, I will tell you this: I never changed my appearance. I never grew my hair long. I never grew a beard or anything like that, because what motivates people in the illicit drug industry, and if you don't think it's an industry, you're nuts, is greed. And if you've got money, people will sell you drugs. And so we would do controlled buys. We would, do search warrants. We did all kinds of, it was great. I mean, it was dangerous, but it was absolutely a lot of fun. And then I became a SWAT hostage negotiator. So yeah, I drank deeply of the cup of law enforcement.
That is unbelievable because, it's almost like a bad movie, right? Like if you are the 6'8" guy with close crop hair and you're coming to buy drugs from me, you're obviously not on my side. And so that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
But the SWAT hostage negotiator is what it's really interesting to me because first I have to ask, how often were you called to negotiate?
A lot more than you think, because we were called hostage negotiators, but it was also crisis negotiation. I mean, there were many times where somebody had a fight with their mother, grabbed a gun, barricaded themselves in a bedroom. Sometimes they'd be shooting out the window. Sometimes they weren't shooting at all. But now you're engaged with them. Sometimes it would be, homicide would get a tip that a person who's wanted for a certain murder was held up in his girlfriend's apartment at this location. So we'd surround the apartment building and we would try to make contact with that person and call them out. So it was a lot of different scenarios that we would be called out for, but we were called out quite a bit. We were not a full-time SWAT team. An artist, I'm going to date myself again. We carried pagers back then, and so when the pager went off, you would look, where am I going? And you would go to that location. And so it took time to gear up and get ready and get all the equipment and stuff like that. But once we got into it, it was a lot of fun. I worked with really great people and had great training.
So what did you learn during that phase of your life that really helped you in those negotiations with the individuals, whether it was hostage or singular? Because it seems like there should be, or there could be, some common things that people in that type of crisis are thinking, and there's stuff that they really need to hear. What did you learn about that?
Yeah, a lot. I mean, first off, I remember when I first got on the team, they gave us a formula. And the formula was how we, as human beings, communicate with each other. And the formula was 7-38-55. So 7% of how a message comes across are the words that we use. And think how many times you've said something, be like, ooh, I wish I hadn't have said that, or I wish I would have said that differently. Right. That's only 7% of how that message gets communicated. 38% is the tone of voice that you use with that message. Are you really excited and you can't wait to tell the person what's going on and you're talking like this? Or are you kind of doing the Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh? Oh, this is terrible. Life is not going to, you're right. So how are you communicating that with your voice? And then 55%, so more than half of how that message comes across is our body language and our facial expressions. And the reason they gave us that formula was because, like I said, if somebody was barricaded in their room with a gun, I was not in the room with them. That would not have been a safe thing for me to do. So we didn't have the luxury of that 55%. We didn't have the luxury of saying something to someone and see them kind of roll their eyes like, oh, what an idiot. I can't believe Terry said that to me. So we had to get good at figuring things out, certainly by what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying it. So how did we do that? We started out with tactical empathy. And I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. And all that is help me to understand what's going on, or help me to understand where you're coming from today. And the important word there is understand. I mean, if you were a homicide suspect that just murdered 3 people, I wasn't going to be like, oh yeah, I totally agree with what you did. But understanding leads to trust, and trust leads me to a point where I could potentially get you out safely. And think about any good relationship you have in your life, whether it's with your spouse, whether it's your kids, your boss, your parents, whoever. If that relationship isn't founded on trust, it's not a very good relationship. So we're trying to develop trust with an individual that more than likely is having the worst day of their life. I mean, if you're talking to me and your house is surrounded by the police, you're not having a good day. And then, getting them to a point where I've never met you before, but I need you to trust me to try to get you out safely. So those were a couple things. I mean, we could spend hours on the other things that I've learned. So,
But that's amazing though, and I think those things are really important because even when you're not in the life or death hostage negotiation phase, the way you communicate with people is extremely important in really being able to get your message or point across. But it's also important for the person to be able to engage with you and understand what it is that you really need, how they should respond and so understanding that piece of not just what you say, but how you say it and how you look while you're saying it is very, very important, I think. And it matters no matter what career choices you make or what environment you might be in.
oh, absolutely. I mean, we negotiate every day, whether we like it or not, whether we understand it or not. And I'll give you you and I were talking before we jumped on the actual recording. You mentioned a word, and I thought was kind of interesting because it was a word that we were given as well. And that word was curious. We were always taught to be curious, always, why is this going on? And I just used a word that we would never ask why questions. We would never say to you, artist, why did you wear that shirt today? Oh, wait a minute, does Terry not like my shirt? Why questions sound accusatory? Because when we were all growing up and we would do something goofy, our parents would be like, Terry, why did you do that?
Why?
Oh, wait a minute, I shouldn't have done that. So we would ask how and what questions. I didn't get to the same answer with, well, artist, what made you decide to wear that shirt today? It lands a little bit softer
It does.
than why did you wear that? And so we would use how and what questions, and we would stay away from why questions. So that's another thing we used to do.
And how long were you in law enforcement?
10 years.
10 years. Okay. So at 10 years, what changed? What made you decide that no, you were going to no longer be in law enforcement?
So what got me into law enforcement was my wife saying, yes, I support you. I know I married you as a suit and tie, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, hospital administrator, but yes, sure, go ahead, work nights, get shot out, be on SWAT, do all that fun stuff. And she has always been the primary breadwinner, and she lost her job in Cincinnati and was not able to find another one. And so she took a job in Houston, so I got out of law enforcement to support her since she had supported me so well. And, my family's always been more important than my job. I was a cop, but it wasn't who I was. It's what I did for a living.
Right.
And so when she lost her job and found one in Houston, it was like, okay, it's time to move on and find something else to do.
That distinction is, I think, really important, and it's one that I've started to learn more and more as I've talked to people, is that there are a lot of people, for whatever reason, that identify themselves based on their occupation and not necessarily on who they are as a person. It makes those types of things very difficult to do because you'd be leaving yourself behind to do something different if you are attached that way. Do you have any reasoning on why people think that way, and really the healthy way to really talk about or think about your occupation versus who you are?
I do. I mean, I think it's what's foundational. It's what are your values? What grounds you? I mean, there were a lot of times after a shift or after a SWAT call up or whatever, that was like, hey, come on, we're all going out to the bar. And it was like, no, I love you guys. I would lay down my life for you, but I am not going to the bar to drink with you. I am going home to my wife and daughter because that's what grounds me. Those are the people that love me unconditionally. That's where I recharge my batteries and things like that. So I don't want to go, I went on with you. I want to go home to the people that I care about. And I've always said through my life and certainly through my cancer journey, what's really sustained me is what I call my 3 F's. And they're in order: faith, family, and friends. Those are really what have gotten me through life. That's what's important to me. That's what, as I said, recharges my batteries.
And you mentioned your daughter. She plays or played basketball, and you had an opportunity to coach too. Is that right?
I did, which may or may not have been a good thing. I did. My daughter, unfortunately or fortunately, got my height. Is 6 foot, almost 6'3". Had an NBA outside 3-point shooting range, and was recruited to play in college. And actually played her freshman year at the United States Air Force Academy until she
Wow.
blew out her knee and wasn't able to play, but still went on for the remaining 3 years and graduated in 2019. Is now an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, coaching young women in basketball has to have been something totally different than your play experience, right?
Yes. So, I
What?
mean, the whole situation. I mean, when my wife was pregnant with our daughter, I said, I got two brothers. I have no sisters. And so, we go to the OBGYN, and he's like, do you want to know the sex of the baby? Oh, yeah, yeah, sure. She said, well, you should buy pink. I was like, oh, no, 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 no. You need to leave it in there till it's done. I have no idea how to raise a girl or what to do with a girl. But my daughter and I are probably as close, as any parent and child are. We talk to her almost every day. She's in Florida at this point in time. But coaching her was an entirely different matter. And honestly, artists, I think there were times where I didn't do a very good job, where I would
Mhm.
get mad at her because of, what another teammate did or something like that. And, there were times it's like, you better go home with your mother tonight. I'll drive home by myself. That way we'll keep the peace in the family and things like that. My wife was kind of like Switzerland, she was neutral. And so, would come between the two of us. But it was so interesting. And I'll give you an example. We were playing a game one time, and I pointed to one of the girls on the bench. I said, go in for so and so. And, she shakes her head in the affirmative. And I go back to coaching, and out of the corner of my eye, I can see the scores table, and there's nobody there. And so I turn back to her, and I'm like, hey, get in there for so and so. She's giving me the, okay, okay. I turn back around, I'm doing the coaching. Again, out of the corner of my eye, I can see the scores table. She's not there. I finally turn to her, and I'm like, get in the game. And now she's like a big league pitcher shaking me off like I'm the catcher. No, 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 I don't like that sign. I'm not going in. I'm like, what? What do you mean you're not going in the game? How could you not want to go in the game? So I bring her to me. And artist, I'm like, are we going to have a counseling session right here in the middle of
In the
a high
middle of the
school
game.
basketball? Yeah, totally going in. I'm like, we're face to face. I'm like, what's wrong? And then the tears start down the
Oh
cheeks.
no.
And I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, Coach, I don't want to go in the game. I said, I said, you come out here every day, you work hard to get better and to make your teammates better. There are no uniform wearers on this team. If I need you in the game, I need you in the game. Why don't you want to go in the game? Long pause. She said, Coach, because my friends are in the stands, and if I make a mistake, they will make fun of me. And I said, what about your responsibility to your teammates? I mean, you come out here, like I say, every day, work hard in practice, make them better. What about your responsibility
Right.
to them? That was the hook that I used to get her to go into the game. It's like, yeah, I understand your friends are in the States, and I understand you might make a mistake, and that's okay. I just want your best effort. Do the very best you can. And so artists, I mean, literally, I'm like, I never in all my years of playing basketball, being on teams, guys are like, Coach, you want me in the game? I don't care how terrible I am, I'm going in the game. Girls were like, no, I don't know about this whole playing stuff. So it was definitely a learning experience for me, and I'm sure it was for the girls as well.
I tell you that I can almost feel that conversation though, like and her feeling like, oh my gosh, if I go out here and I have this problem, what's going to happen to me?
Right.
And it goes back to the original conversation we're having around allowing fear to really rule what's going to happen or what you're going to do, rather than really thinking about, I'm prepared, I'm part of this team, and the rest of the team depends on me. I'm going to actually go out here and I'm going to perform.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, as we think about the list of things that you've done over time, I think it's just tremendous. But it really ultimately led you to where you are today. And so you had an unfortunate kind of different diagnosis, something completely unexpected. And it's one of those things that can either break you or help teach you how to look at things differently and use that to be able to empower not only yourself but other people who may be in, I won't call them similar, but maybe not dissimilar situations. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So 2012, girls high school basketball coach, I have a callus break open on the bottom of my left foot, right below my third toe. And initially, I don't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a little cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he does. And he shows it to me. It's just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it. No dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sends it off to pathology. And then 2 weeks later, I get the call from him. As I mentioned, he's a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he's having explaining to me what's going on, the more frightened, the more scared I'm becoming. Until finally he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I have been a doctor for 25 years and I have never seen the form of cancer you have. You have an incredibly rare form of melanoma. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun. Affects the melanin, the pigment in our skin. Mine has nothing to do with sun exposure. It's a rare form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of the feet, palms of the hands. And because my cancer was so uncommon, he said, you need to go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston and be treated. And so I did. And they excised, they took out the bottom part of my foot where the tumor was, and they took out all the lymph nodes in my groin. And then they looked at me and said, you'll probably be dead in 2 years. We have absolutely nothing to offer you other than surgery. There's no therapies, there's no drugs, there's nothing. And I thought, well, you gave me a death sentence. How can I try to turn that death sentence into a life sentence? And so my oncologist initially put me on a drug called interferon to help keep the disease from coming away or from coming back. The interferon was a horrible, nasty, debilitating drug for me. It gave me severe flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having a terrible case of the flu every week for 5 years and knowing this isn't going to cure me. As my doctor used to say, we're just kicking the can down the road. All we're doing is trying to buy you more time. Eventually, the interferon became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit of the hospital with a body temperature of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. Somehow I survived that, but I had to stop the interferon, and almost immediately the cancer came back in the exact same spot on my foot. That necessitated my foot being amputated in 2018. Cancer worked its way up my leg. 2019, 2 more surgeries. And then in 2020, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, I had a tumor kind of in my ankle area that grew large enough that it fractured my tibia. It broke my leg.
Oh, wow.
And my only recourse in the middle of the COVID pandemic was to have my left leg amputated above the knee. And I also found out I have tumors in my lungs, which I still have. I'm still being treated for those tumors. So yeah, it's been a 13-year odyssey of trying to die, but God's saying, yeah, not yet. We're going to keep you hanging around for a while. So.
Wow. And so in 2020 is when you authored your book. Is that right?
Yeah. After I had my leg amputated, during that 4 to 5 month period where I was healing from the amputation, that's, it's like, well, I need something to do. So, well, why not? Let's write a book and see what happens.
So, I mean, it's unbelievable to think that you're going through all of these different stages of dealing with this rare cancer, and you're on the treatment with interferon, which I can't imagine being flu sick every week for that period of time. What goes through your mind about continuing that type of therapy, and how do you think about the pain that goes along with being in that situation versus, and I've heard you talk about how you've got choices around suffering versus not so many choices about the pain.
Absolutely. I mean, interferon, despite everything I've gone through during these 13 years, that 5-year window of interferon was probably the worst of my life. I'm I'm about 230 pounds, and I lost 50 pounds during that therapy. As a matter of fact, there was a point where I was so skinny that I was pretty sure I could go hang gliding on a Dorito. It's a good joke, but it works. So I mean, I lost all this weight. I lost my ability to taste. I was constantly sick. I was so sick at one point of being sick that I just prayed to die. I felt there was sort of two camps. There was people that were living, and then there was the people that were not dying. And I was in the not dying camp. I didn't feel I was living. I wasn't contributing. I wasn't working. I didn't, sometimes a good day would literally be get out of bed and make it to the sofa. That's how bad I felt. And so it was, come on, God, just take me out of this. Let me be done with it. Let my family get on with their lives. But obviously God didn't take me out of it. I mean, he did give me the strength to go on. But I've always felt that I don't think we suffer in vain. I think we need to find the meaning in our misery, the message in our misery. And there's something we're supposed to learn from, you and I were talking about that earlier. There's something we're supposed to learn from the events, the good things, the bad things, the failures in our lives. And what is that? What are we supposed to understand to make us better? And I'll tell you two things I've learned through this, artist, that I think are incredibly important. Number one, I don't think you truly know yourself until you've been tested by some form of adversity in your life. It doesn't have to be cancer like mine has. It could be any kind, abusive parents, alcohol, whatever it ends up being. And secondly, and this is going to sound kind of weird, cancer has made me a better human being. I've been asked if I could live my life over again without cancer, would I do it? And I honestly don't think I would. I would take all the stuff that I've been through and I'd do it again because I am absolutely a much better human being now than I was before this disease hit my body.
That's a powerful statement to make, and I think it is. It's very indicative of the way you think about things. And if any of us were to recall all the things, if we could recall all the things that have happened to us that were formative, and understand where we would have gone if we had not had that thing happen to us, I think a lot of us would make similar choices to live the way we did because it ultimately led you to where you are. Absolutely. But it's a hard thing to conceptualize when where you are is maybe not the best place to be, right? And so it's one thing to think, man, yeah, I'd do it all over again because where I am, I feel like it's great, and I've got this long outlook ahead of me versus I don't know exactly what my future looks like, but I still would do it that way.
Absolutely, and I've always said that, and my doctors don't like it when I say this, but I always kind of felt like doctors were sort of like bookies in Vegas. They look at you and say, okay, based on your age, based on your overall level of health, and based on your stage of cancer, you're probably going to live X. But what doctors don't understand is you want to see your child graduate from high school. You want to see your child graduate from college. You want to walk your child down the aisle. You want to play with your grandkids. And having something to look forward to, something that is meaningful for you, really, I think, energizes you. It keeps your body, it keeps your mind, it keeps your spirit going. Now, I'll say the opposite of that. I have also seen people, well, let me back up for a second. I've always wanted my life to be based on the decisions that I made, not on the ones that I didn't make or that somebody else made for me. But the converse of that is true. And I've seen it. I've seen it over these 13 years where a doctor will say to a patient, yeah, you'll probably be dead in 2 years. And an artist, literally on the 2-year anniversary, that person dies.
That person dies, yes.
They're gone.
Yes.
And it's like, no. I mean, I know I'm going to go. I mean, we're all going to go. But at the same time, I want to go as much on my terms, or I want to live as long as I possibly can. And that goes back to kind of this whole discussion, purpose. What is your purpose? And a big question that I asked myself when I got sick was, do you want to live? And it seems like a very simple question. Oh, well, of course I want to live. But there are a lot of people, the answer to that question is no. I don't want to live through this. I don't want to go through that. I don't want to have my leg amputated. I don't want to be on chemotherapy. I don't want to live. I want to live, and I want to live as long and as good as I possibly can with whatever time I have left.
Your relationship with your daughter and hearing a little bit about your wife, it's very interesting for me in the way your family is built and the fact that you make some decisions are made for you and other decisions are made for the people you care about. And your decisions around treatments, some of them have not been necessarily decisions for you as much as they've been for decisions for people that you care about. And the story around your family meeting called by your daughter is just I find that fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. So I have my leg amputated. My doctor wants to start me on chemotherapy, and I was like, "Is it going to save my life?" And he's like, "Probably not, but it might buy you some more time." And I said, "Well, if the outcome is going to be the same, if I'm going to die, and I made peace with dying a long time ago, I said I don't think I want to do it. I said, but I'll go home and talk to my family." And I do. I literally went home. My daughter was at the Air Force Academy at the time. She was home on break, and I said, "Okay, here's what the doctor wants." I said, "I don't want to do it." My daughter's like, "All right, we need a family meeting." I'm like, "Family meeting? There's three of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that. It's like we need a family meeting." So we literally sat around the kitchen table and individually talked about how we felt about me having chemotherapy. And then when that was over, my daughter was like, "All right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy?" And my wife and daughter raised their hand. I'm like, "Wait a minute.
Got outvoted.
Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want?" But artists, I remember back when I was in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he argued that you would fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemotherapy, not because I wanted to, but because I love my wife and daughter more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the bridge that got me to the clinical trial drug that I'm on now. And had, that event not happened, had we not had that family meeting, there's a very good chance you and I wouldn't be talking right now.
To me, it's remarkable how those pieces come together to get you to where you are, and you don't know it in the moment, right? But if you think about the decisions you could have made, you wouldn't have landed where you are. And so it's very important to take the steps and trust the intuition because it makes a big difference, I think, over the long run of where you end up landing.
Absolutely. It's surrounding yourself with good people, surrounding
Yeah,
yourself with people that have your best interest in mind and love you enough that they're willing to tell you the truth, even
that's
if it's,
important.
yeah, even if it affects the relationship. And I mean, my family loves me enough to say, "No, Dad, you're taking chemotherapy." Like, okay.
I think, this is for me very, it just kind of comes together because there's four thoughts that you put together that you try to impart with people. The first is to control your mind, right? And so do you mind talking through those 4 points for me?
Sure. So I came up with these, what I call my four truths. And they're just one sentence. I actually have them on a post-it note here in my office. So I see them multiple times during the day and they constantly get reinforced in my mind. And I'll give them to you. The first one is control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more determined individual. The third one I look at is kind of a legacy type of truth, and it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the last one I think is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I talk about these four truths sort of as the bedrock of my soul. I just think they're a good place to try to start to build a quality life off of.
I think those truths are absolutely spot on, and I think it's really important for people of all age brackets to think about. But I really do think those are fundamental building blocks for people who are making decisions today about where they want to be tomorrow people who are starting careers, people who are making decisions about beginning a business, who are thinking about beginning a family, right? Like thinking about those things, I think aims you in the right direction. And it's fundamental to reflect on those and to really regroup, because things are not always going to go well or not even the way you expected them to go. And being able to reflect and then think about that before you make a decision, I think is important.
It is. And you know, I use these truths, but I'm also, and I don't want your audience to think, I mean, you're looking at me now, there's no S on my chest. I do not have a cape and fly around with magical powers. I mean, I'm still treated for these tumors in my lungs. My wife would tell you this, you know, every Sunday, I know I'm going to treatment on a Monday. It's like, I don't want to do this. I know what's coming. I have a terrible reaction to my medication. I don't want to shake. I don't want to throw up. I don't want to have a fever. I don't want to do this stuff. But it's okay. I don't want to do it. But I know I'm going to do it. It's just sort of a way of, okay, I got to get this out. And that was another thing about being a hostage negotiator. You know, when we have these feelings, whether they're positive, whether they're negative, whether somebody's lying to you, whether they're telling you the truth, whatever, it's important to call it out. So if you're scared, I would tell you to call it out. Don't be like, oh, I'm tough, I'm macho, I don't have to. You know, I can't. Call it out. You know what? I'm scared. You know what? I'm nervous. You know what? I'm afraid of the pain that's gonna. Call it out, because if you call it out, you put it out in front of you, and it's like, it's there. I can see it, and if I can see it, I can deal with it. And so by saying these things, I don't want you to think that, you know, I'm a baby or something like that. And granted, sometimes I feel like I am, but it's those things when you're getting ready to take a test and you're nervous. You know what? I'm really nervous about this test. Call it out. Call out those emotions so that you can deal with them. Trying to repress them, trying to put them down is just going to give you an ulcer. Call them out, deal with them, and then move forward in your life.
Yeah. So I've learned so much over the course of the time that we've been speaking. I'm sure the audience is picking up so many important details. If they wanted to find you, learn more, how would they do that?
So I have a blog/website called Motivational Check, where you can leave me a message, you can get access to my book, you can find my social media links. It's all motivationalcheck.com.
Awesome. Well, Terry, again, I can't thank you enough for deciding to spend some time with us. I really think this is the conversation that someone out there needs to hear, and I'm glad we could have it today. I wish you all the best, and I'm going to be checking out your blog too, and hopefully we'll get to have some more conversation, because some of the things that we talked about today, I think we scratched the surface on, but they could be entire conversations by themselves, and I'd love to be able to do that with you.
Well, Artis, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed talking with you. And I always say, if our conversation provides value to at least one of your audience, today's been a good day.
Incredible. Thank you again.
Thank you.
If you've made it this far, then I have to thank you for your time. I hope you've learned something new and enjoyed listening to the discussion as much as I enjoyed having it. I'd love to hear from you about the show, because we're working really hard to bring you great content, and the feedback really helps us get better. If you like what you've heard or watched, for those of you who are streaming out on YouTube, then take a split second to give us a thumbs up or a like. It really helps other people like you find the show too. And no one likes to miss out on the good stuff, so go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't have to wonder when or if there's a new episode. And until next time, stay remarkable.